So I just got back from a 2-week trip. I was in Chicago, in Cleveland, and then in Mexico, in Cozumel, Mexico City, Puebla, and Jalapa, all in 2 weeks. So, I thought I'd just share something that came up in the course of the teachings. In Mexico, I was asked to speak on Shantideva's chapter 6 from, engaging in the Bodhisattva's deeds. And it's the chapter on working with anger, on developing fortitude. So one question that comes up a lot in that kind of context, because many people, they see, yes, anger's a problem, and they raise their hand and they say, my husband, my wife, mother, father, brother, sister, employer, employee, pet frog, pet pig, my friend, somebody I know has this horrible problem with anger. How can I help them? Okay, so from the side of these people, they really want to help their friends, and they see their question as a compassionate question of, how they can help somebody with a problem they have. Okay? It's not a question that is easy to answer because we cannot control other people. And this is the one thing that's so problematic for people when they ask, how can I help somebody, is their idea, or at least I think their idea, is that I will give them the one perfect method that all they need to do is say this or do this, and then that person who has the problem with anger will change. And of course I can't, say that or, give the one perfect thing that will change somebody else's mind. And even if I did, because Shantideva's methods are all perfect things, somebody else being receptive is a totally different ballgame. And many times people are just not receptive to the advice that we have to give them. In fact, they don't want our advice. And they will let us know in very clear terms that they don't want our advice. But what happens then is that it's very frustrating for us because we see somebody's hurting. We see that they're confused. We want to help and we can't. Yeah, because they're not receptive at that particular moment. And the big thing we come up with in this situation is that we cannot control other people. And we think somehow, because these other people are so close to us, that we should be able to control them. Of course, we may not use the word control. We may use the word, we should be able to make the right argument that they will see makes sense and do what we say. But that boils down to controlling. Okay? And of course we can't control anybody else, and it's very frustrating for us. And this is where I think one way in which we really need to practice Dharma is to realize that the only person we can possibly control is ourselves. Yeah, we can't control anybody else. So, as my mother would say, don't knock your head against the wall. We can influence other people. We can encourage other people. We cannot make anybody else change. Yeah, and then getting frustrated about our inability to make somebody else change only makes us more miserable and makes us angry at them, because they're so dumb that they don't take our wonderful, fantastic sage's advice that would definitely solve their problem. Right? Yeah, and we live so often with this kind of frustration. But I think that, and we feel like we're compassionate people, but I think that somehow we're out of sync here, And what we have to come back to is first understanding our own mind, how our own mind works. In this case, what are our own blocks for developing fortitude? Why is it that we hang on so much to our anger and hatred even though it makes us miserable? Yeah, and to get to know ourselves, to understand our own mind, and this would involve us also understanding why we haven't listened to other people's wise advice about how we should change. Yeah, and so this kind of understanding of ourselves makes it much easier to really understand and accept where other people are at. And when we can accept that people are at where they're at, and that doesn't make them wrong, and it doesn't make them bad, and it doesn't mean our advice is wrong or bad or ill-suited. It simply means that they're not receptive at this moment, and what they need is something else. And very often in this situation, what they need is space. Yeah, because lots of people, they have to learn by making the mistakes themselves and then figuring out that they need help. I know for me, this has been the case many times in my life. Yeah, that if somebody just says, do this, and I don't understand why, or if I feel like they're criticizing me when they give the advice, then immediately I'm like this. Yeah, and it's only when I fall down that I realize that I could use some tips when I'm walking about how to keep walking and how not to fall down. But it's only, it's only when you fall down that you realize you need help. When you're still managing, even though not very well, you often think you don't need help. Okay? So my point here is, first of all, that we need to focus on ourselves and helping ourselves and understanding how our own mind works. Yeah? And second, that we need to accept where other people are at and that they may not be where we would like them to be. Yeah? And not put any judgment of good, bad, or otherwise on it. They just are who they are. They're at where they're at, and that our job is to keep the door open. Yeah. And then third, to avoid getting frustrated because we can't control the world. Yeah. Because here what we're bumping up against again and again is our own self-grasping ignorance, this idea that there's a big me who's in control, and our self-centered thought, which thinks that, what I have to say is obviously the best thing for the other person, and that they should take it to heart immediately, and they should thank me profusely for the help I've given them, and to really step back and see, that our compassion and our wisdom, what we think of, what we're saying this person, has actually been contaminated by self-grasping ignorance and the self-centered mind. And that we need to come back to really accepting what is without getting discouraged, being able to keep the door open for when the person later on decides that they need help, or when they later on, understand that what we said. Because if we get frustrated and angry, then that just destroys our virtue, and it kind of ruins the relationship with the person who we're trying to help. Yeah. Make some sense? I learned that through knocking my head on the wall a lot. Yeah. Any comments or questions on it? Right, because we think the argument is inherently right for everybody. And here's where you see the Buddha's skill as a teacher, is he may see that argument is really true and valid, but it's not necessarily the right argument for this individual at this particular time. And this is why the Buddha is such a fantastic teacher, is because he doesn't give everybody the same advice at the same time. He really knows that people have different ways of thinking and different dispositions, and they need to be dealt with in different ways. Okay, so you're saying that your advices are working with the other people, or your arguments are working with them, or what? Yeah, okay, so it's for the mind that says, I'm right, and why don't they listen? Yeah. Okay. I think first it's a thing of like slowing down and really listening to what the other person's saying. And when you really listen with your heart, without first thinking about what you're going to respond, but you're listening just to hear where they're at, then you can sense a little bit where they're at, what they already believe in, what it is that could be the next step for them, if they're asking for advice or not, if they're open to receiving something or not. You can kind of get more of a sense of where they're at. And you can also get a sense of how, if you do sense that, gee, they want to continue talking on this topic, because sometimes you sense, no, I've heard enough, thank you very much, that was interesting, let's talk about what the baseball scores are now. Okay, so sometimes, so then you go on to talk about the baseball scores and let them do it, and you do something else. But other times, you might get a sense of, kind of, they're interested, but when would be a good time to say more? Or what would be good to say? Yeah. And often with people who aren't Buddhist, and very often even with people who are Buddhist, I think it's much more skillful to talk in terms of ourselves and tell them what we do. Because most people don't like being told what they should do, even if our arguments are right and we know best. Right? But it's much more effective to just say, like, gee, I have this difficulty with anger, and I was reading about this, or my teacher said this, and I tried this, and it kind of helped me. It took a while, but gradually I began to understand this deeper and deeper. But if you talk about yourself, people don't feel threatened. If you say you, then many people automatically, before you can say more than you, have gone like this. Yeah? So, but I think the listening is a big part of it, because sometimes, how to say, we're a little bit too eager to help, because our help is more like showing what we know or showing that we're right. There's a little bit of that underneath the motivation, so that kind of corrupts it. Whereas really listening gives us a lot more information. Oh, with all the great arguments, then I tell myself I should practice that. Yeah? If I keep replaying the thing of, well, I really want to say to them blah, 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 and then come back to, but obviously that's not skillful at this moment. Well, I need to practice that very same advice. Yeah, and that cuts the ruminating. Yeah. Okay?